The aim of this experiment is to investigate if schema processing influences both encoding and retrieval. The participants listened to a story about two boys who skipped school one day and went to one of their homes because it was always empty on Thursdays. The house was described as isolated and in a good neighborhood, with a leaky roof, a color TV, a coin collection, and a bike. The participants heard a story that was based on 72 points and was split into half-half groups. They were then told to read the story in terms of a house buyer and the other half in terms of a burglar. After reading, they were distracted for 12 minutes, then delayed for 5 minutes as half the participants had to receive a different schema. Those in the burglar group were switched to the buyer group and vice versa. The other half of the participants retained their schema. Their recall was tested. The participants in the changed schema group remembered 7% more points on the second recall than the first. Recall of points that were only linked to the new schema increased 10%, while recall of points relating to the previous schema decreased. The group that retained their original schema remembered fewer points the second time around. The results show that schema processing must affect retrieval and encoding, because the new schema could have only influenced recall during the retrieval stage. People also encoded information which is irrelevant to their prevailing schema, because those in the buyer schema could remember information relating to the burglar schema and vice versa. The changed schema recalled 7% more on the second recall than the first, and 10% increase in recollection of subjects linked to the new schema. Recall of subjects linked to the previous schema declined. Participants who retained the same schema declined in recollection in second trial. Results indicate that schema processing must have an effect at retrieval as well as encoding. Participants encoded information deemed irrelevant to their prevailing schema, since those who had the buyer schema at encoding were able to recall the burglar information when this schema was changed and vice versa. The strengths of this experiment is that it is highly controlled and conducted in a lab. The variable control enabled the researchers to establish a cause and effect relationship on how schemas affect different memory processes, and the process and procedure was thoroughly explained. The weakness of this experiment is that it lacks ecological validity, meaning the results of this experiment cannot be generalized. The aim of this experiment is to test the hypothesis that explaining emotional expressions using specific emotion concepts at encoding biases perceptual memory for those expressions. Participants reported individually to the laboratory for an experiment on brain reactions to computer images. There were 4 phases to the experiment: stimulus encoding, recognition and viewing in counterbalance order, and concept recall. The participants were shown the stimulus, given time to process the information, and later asked to recall their memory. Phases conceptualized in terms of anger were remembered as angrier than the same phases conceptualized in terms of happiness, regardless of whether the explanations were told aloud or imagined. The experiments showed that explanation is necessary for the conceptual biases to emerge fully and extended to the findings to anger, sad expressions. An emotion blend more common in real life. The results support a categorical emotions model of the influences of emotion in information processing. The results of 4 lexical decision experiments and 1 word naming study demonstrated that emotional states are associated with facilitated processing of material that is specifically associated with the experiment's emotional state, but not that of material associated only by emotional valence. The findings of the research that examined groupings of similar concepts show that when in emotional states, people tend to categorize according to a common emotional association in an orderly fashion. They group things associated with happiness and things associated with sadness. The last research program pursued the idea that mediating mechanism in the emotional categorization results are selective attentional. In making similarity judgments, individuals who are experiencing distinct emotional states emphasize emotional as compared to non-emotional dimensions of the stimuli. These findings support the conclusion that emotions are mental processes that are important in their own right for a full account of mental functioning. The strength of this experiment is that it has a control group to secure the validity of the experiment. Multiple experiments demonstrate different approaches to results that prove the same hypothesis. The weakness of this experiment is that the results cannot be generalized because participants are not randomly selected.